Commissioner O'Neill,
Here.
Commissioner Barbos,
Here.
Commissioner Willers,
Here.
Commissioner McDonald,
Here.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Here.
and Chair Wellender.
Here. We will move on to the Pledge of Allegiance, and I will not delegate, I will lead it tonight. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, we're going to solicit comments from the public on items not appearing on the agenda. And does that include the audio? Or the Zoom?
I don't believe we're Zooming anymore.
So, we're good. Moving right along to item number 4, review and acceptance of our agenda. Does anybody have any thoughts or? Microphone. Thank you. Voice was loud. Any comments about our third agenda? We can have go. There you go.
When it's red, it's on.
You know, technology is not my strength there, Mr. Vice Chair. So with that, do we have a motion for regarding the agenda?
I move to accept.
Second?
Second.
Roll call?
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yep.
Commissioner Barbos,
Here.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
Chair Wellender.
Yes. All right, moving on. Do we have any lake correspondence?
I believe you got an email from the Darling family. Did you all see that? Okay, it was late this afternoon,
No, I did not.
probably within the last hour.
Come into our mailbox.
It did, and I'll read it during the presentation as part of the public comments.
Thank you. All right, moving right along to number 6, the consent calendar. We have both the some draft meeting notes of the past, the April of 2021, February 10th, 22, and March 10th, 22. Do we have any reasons to pull this off consent? Yes, Mr. Willers.
We don't need to pull it, but I want to make a note that I abstained from the draft minutes of 4:22 and 2:10. I wasn't here.
Okay.
And I similarly will abstain from 422 as I was not there.
And I will abstain from March the 10th, 2022, because I was not present.
And anyone else have any comments? And I'm not sure how important this is, but on the February 10th meeting notes under public comment, we did not get Daniel's last name, but Daniel spoke. And I'm not sure if this was Daniel of the Old Testament or who, but I don't know if that's a requisite to be officially a record. But anyway, it's my only comment. So with that, do I have a motion for the consent calendar?
Move to approve.
Second?
Move to approve.
Second?
Second.
Mr. Chair, that was with the changes as noted, or is that just the, you can actually approve consent calendar with the changes that were addressed, just do it in one motion, I think you're fine.
Perfect. Then, do we need to adjust the motions? Okay, good. Roll call.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, that was for the minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I do realize that we now have the 6.2, which is the housing element report.
That would be to pull it off consent, so Christine could just make a brief presentation. if
Yes,
that's
we
okay.
would like
I'm
to-
sure that was in the motion originally, right?
It was intended because we wanted to hear the report I'm sorry, we said brief report?
Yeah, I heard this already. The planning at the city council meeting.
So on the city council hearing on April 6th, staff gave a brief presentation summarizing the city's progress in 2021 towards implementation of our housing element. And I'm very happy to report that we have made excellent progress. We have 2 years left in our RENA cycle, and we have met or exceeded the housing produced in every single income category. The low income, extremely low, we just met, and every other category we exceeded by between 120 and 145%. So we're in really great shape going into our sixth cycle.
Christina did a good job. If you want to pull that council packet up, you'll see the accomplishments that occurred. It was quite extensive. And I'll make some comments later on tonight about SB 9 because it is somewhat intricately tied to that in our reporting to HCD. But with respect to the APR, which all California jurisdictions are required to submit to the state by April 1st, there is no penalty for a few days late, interest or penalties. But with respect to the income categories, that's really positive news for our city. It basically means that your goals and your policies of your general plan have actually worked. And yet we have 2 more years in which to add to that on top of the minimum, if you will, or what the RENA was requiring. So your policies have been effective with 2 years left in the cycle. Probably the most important for the planning nerds here and your staff is that how it relates to SB 35. SB 35 is the law that basically says jurisdictions, if you haven't done a certain amount of housing up to a certain point in your element, there's certain streamlined processes that come into play. Well, we actually met our numbers by this last calendar year, but the HCD did not recognize our accomplishments, and so so we're still subject to SB 35, even though we've met or exceeded in those 4 categories. And I'm sorry if this is getting in the weeds too much, but what Christina has reported, notwithstanding we've got 2 more years left, for SB 35 in the next cycle, we will not be on that list because we've already met it before we get to 50%. Because we've actually had a certified element that's exceeded our RENA. So very positive news for us. And those streamlined permit processing things do not kick in for the city.
Just on a note on that, if I understand correctly, based on your comments at the council meeting, the net effect of that, however, is that we won't be removed from the SB 35 list until the middle of the next cycle.
No, I'm sorry. We won't be on it. We won't be
As
on
of
that list.
when?
As of when they create that new, the next lists that come out will
Yes.
not have our name on those lists.
And when will that next list come out?
My guess is it's going to come out when the 6th cycle begins.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Anyone else, comments or questions from staff? I have 2. One is, so there's no way that HDC can be updated and they can recognize what we've accomplished? Or is that just a bureaucratic inability?
It's a measure of how the bill was passed, and the metric for being on and off the list was adopted, and they're following through with how
So
they're
once
applying
you're
that
on
list.
it, regardless of meeting anything, you're on it.
For that the remainder of the portion of the cycle.
One of the things, again, not to beat a dead horse, but one of the years during this cycle had not been reported. Now, admittedly, it was only 12 units, but for our community, 12 units is 12 units, and it goes towards the 137 in the RENA. That is our number for that period. So we were pretty excited in catching it that it hadn't been reported, number one. Number two, with the advent of the Saha project and Mockingbird, man, we're pretty jazzed about meeting the minimum numbers for the very low, right on target. I think it's 24. And then, as Christina said, 120 to 150% on some of those other categories. Look, we all know that above moderate is the market rate. Pretty much everybody does that, but not in the way that we've done it, to the extent that we've got those lower categories, those lower income categories already met. And it's kind of sad that when we contacted the HCD, that was their response to us, and we read the law, and that's exactly how they've implemented it.
And then my last question is, we know the RENA numbers for the next cycle is up to what, 311? From staff standpoint, do we need to be rethinking our way of doing things? I mean, it's nice to hear we're successful in the 5th cycle. Do we need to keep doing what we're doing, or are you expecting that we need to be having a little different mindset as we move into the next cycle?
Preliminary, at the outset, our consultant is telling us that we're looking pretty good on the inventory as far as being able to get to the 311. Now, whether we've built in a buffer or not, I don't know the extent of it, but preliminary, I'll give that
we
one.
Preliminarily.
And, she can say it, I can't. We have good policies, so I doubt that there'll be a whole lot of change in some of those, but we will be having to address policies that are new policies in response to legislation since the last element was updated.
And I'll tee on a little bit. So first of all, in front of you, this is our progress to date, just in numerical format. So low income, we produced 152% of our requirement. The same for moderate, and above moderate is 120%. So this is with 2 years remaining in our cycle. And to answer your question, I think what we have been doing through our zoning code amendments is setting ourselves up for success. So one of the big changes with the new RENA numbers is needing to provide more extremely low and low units. We did that when we amended our affordable housing ordinance last year. So we approved 7 zoning code amendments with 25 hearings. So thank you all very much. And thank you to our ad hoc and contributors to the ad hoc for slogging through that. But we've done a lot of work to streamline our code to facilitate housing. And, I think that the timing for all of these ordinances going into place is going to help us a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, rather than talk about SB 9 later on, I think now's a good time since it's been pulled off consent. And it's on my slide here, we can talk about SB 9 for a minute. There's been several articles that have been forwarded to me, notwithstanding the fact that I've been a participant in some webinars and Zoom meetings, watching housing advocates claim that our city with others, and in the first case, it was with 6 other jurisdictions that were flaunting the law on SB 9, and they pointed to 3 things in our ordinance that they think are not consistent with the spirit and the intent. And I'll get to spirit and intent in a minute. But they claim that we have got restrictive measures, if you will, that go against the law, or not inconsistent with the law. No one has ever used that word yet, because that would basically mean that we've violated the law. They talk about the required open space provision that we've required, both the common and the private open space. They're concerned about the mature trees that we require, those being 3 15-gallon trees and 10 5-gallon shrubs, and then also the restriction that we have, if you will, or the requirement that the units be affordable to certain income categories in perpetuity. And with respect to those things, certainly something, if it happens tonight, and by the way, Mr. Chair, I'm still waiting for that phone call, and if it comes, I'm going to take it if that's okay.
Sure.
I have a contact at HCD that I have a question to ask. Those provisions are in our municipal code today as we speak. The issue of the open space and the trees, they've been there for almost 20 years. So this is not new stuff. We've not been a jurisdiction that's thunk up some things just to mess with SB 9. That was never the intent. So we have adopted standards that are consistent with the municipal code. The issue of the perpetuity, that is a new one. If you recall, when we had made the increases to our affordable inclusionary housing ordinance, we went from 20 to 25%. That's when we placed the perpetuity component in there. So I'm interested in hearing what the AG says. Most recently, within the last 3 or 4 days, there's been a few articles. It seems to be the one that people have concerns about 28 or 29 jurisdictions that have been reported to HCD. HCD has gone public with saying, we will review and send letters to those that we think, after we've reviewed, are in violation of the spirit of the law. And again, when it comes to the violation of the spirit of the law, that's another thing with respect to getting our attorneys involved. Thank you.
Well, just to tag on to that, I read an article in the Bohemian, which cast Sonoma in that light quite negatively. I just received an email today from the Sonoma Collaborative, in which they join in on those claims of an intentional effort on the city's part to circumvent the implementation of SB 9 by placing obstacles in its path. I was both dismayed and surprised to see it, and I failed to understand the motivation of people who seem to object, on the one hand, to an affordability covenant when it's imposed, and object to an affordability covenant when it's not imposed. I honestly cannot see any consistency or logic in some of the advocates who are out there. So I don't really know who or what's behind this latest thrust. I just want to add that, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to SB 9, this is much ado about nothing. In my opinion, the effect of SB 9 on the city of Sonoma is going to be marginal to nothing. And I may be proved wrong, but I don't think so. And so why it is that this particular issue is sucking all the air out of the room, and there are so many things that can be discussed about housing policy and housing opportunities in this Sonoma, is just amazing to me. And so hopefully this will all dissipate and blow over. But as far as I'm concerned, this SB 9 discussion is a distraction from the major issues we are facing.
What we've demonstrated through this annual progress report is that we've done a lot of things to promote housing and further the production of housing. I think with respect to the 4 jurisdictions in Southern California that have taken exception to the law, which is causing the attention of the AG, is that they basically said home rule is ours, and you did give us discretion in SB 9 to craft law that is unique to your jurisdiction. And that's, I think, the fundamental argument as to why they're not letting it go. And God bless them, in my opinion. I think the important thing here is when the legislature says, let's make housing affordable, are they really saying, let's put it there with a capital A or a small a? And I'm afraid that if it's the small a, you've just blessed your town with market rate housing, which is anathema, I think, to where this community wants to go, to provide affordable housing with a capital A and get it to those people that need it the most. And end of preaching, sorry.
And just to highlight some of the accomplishments that we did make in affordable housing, we adopted our ADU ordinance, and we're round of cleanups in January. We adopted our inclusionary housing ordinance, and as far as I'm aware, we have the most strict now inclusionary housing requirements in the state that I'm aware of. We've been getting calls from the city of Santa Barbara, city of Los Angeles, city of Vallejo, looking to us for an example, and I think that speaks volumes. We adopted our affordable housing definitions, and then as far as our affordable housing program goes, we've made a huge progress towards doing a better job at managing that. We have a new affordable housing website. We're going to be working on taking applications electronically through our website. We engaged a consultant, Rise Housing, who is going through all of our records, making sure that our records are in place, and they're going to be assisting us with doing 100% compliance on all of our ownership and rental units. So that's one of the planning department's top priorities right now, is hopefully shifting from the SB 9 discussions to looking at what our housing stock is and doing a better job of managing it to make sure that the right people are benefiting from our program.
One last comment to piggyback on what Christina said about getting calls from other jurisdictions. It's not so much going from 20 to 25%. I've worked in jurisdictions that had a 25%. They're calling because we did specify a differentiation between rental and ownership, and we variated the income categories respectively. So in rental, we put 5% towards the extremely very low, 10% for VLI, for very low income, and 10% for low income, again, for rental. But for ownership, we started out at 5% at low income. We created the middle income at 10%, and then we also had above moderate at 10%. So there was that slight offset, if you will, and that's what their calling is about and interested in.
I do have a question that anyone can respond to, and that is, in case of this article in the Bohemian that's written from the Housing Collaborative.
Well, it wasn't from the Housing Collaborative. The Sonoma Valley Collaborative sent out an email today. The article in the Bohemian was of the same ilk, but it was not quoting or attributed to the Sonoma Collaborative.
Because my comment is, when things like that come out that seemingly is misrepresenting what we've accomplished, do we have any justification or motivation to give a response, or is that just without merit?
Personally, I just wait to see if the AG sends us a love letter, and we respond accordingly,
Okay.
rather than giving them any dialogue, because I'd be surprised if they can point something illegal with our ordinance. I mean, we have lawyers that look for that stuff.
Okay, very good. Do we need to then have another motion on the 6.2, or was that folded into the original one? Okay, then with that, I'd love to entertain a motion.
Move to approve item 6.2, the City of Sonoma Housing Element Annual Progress Report.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any comment? Roll call, please.
Commissioner O'Neill?
Turn off your mic so she can't turn hers on.
Commissioner
Yes.
Barbos?
Still here? Yes,
Commissioner
yes.
Willers?
Yes.
Yes.
You didn't
Aye.
even let me do my job. Look at that.
And yes. Very good. Well, we're going to segue now into the public hearing, and we have one item coming up, and that is the 7.1, the consideration, discussion, and possible action to adopt a resolution approving the wine tasting use permit of Thomas Darling and Melissa Redmond to operate a wine tasting facility at 27 East Napa Street. I would welcome your report.
Thank you.
That wasn't brief, that was just a staff report.
Okay, I'll be extra long. All right, well, hopefully this one is fairly simple, but it is excitingly one of our first wine tasting use permits coming before the Planning Commission after the ordinance went through a very lengthy public process. So the subject property is at 27 East Napa Street. It is part of the Sonoma Courtyard Shop. It's located in the southern portion of the courtyard, adjacent to that parking lot in the back, and most recently was occupied by Chapelette Tasting Room, and previously was Sonoma Loeb Winery and Involve. So the tenant space is 944 square feet, and obviously in the middle of the Sonoma Court Shops, so it's zoned for commercial development and has a master use permit for the property. So there's no physical modifications to the building. It's already set up with a bar, ADA access, hot water, everything that would be required for the use. There is a small exterior courtyard that has historically been used for outdoor seating as well. And all the surrounding development is retail. There's some restaurants and lots of tasting rooms, as it's right adjacent to Vine Alley. The Sonoma Municipal Code 1950-120 outlines the rules and regulations for wine tasting use permits, and these were established in 2019 and created new special use standards for tasting rooms and wine bars. Overall, the number in the plaza retail overlay zone is limited to 25. So we're currently below that at 21. So if this is approved this evening, it would be number 22. And the code section includes a few standards, and then most prominently conditions of approval. And the conditions of approval require ongoing compliance with ABC, specific hours of operation that shall not exceed 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., hours of operation for general access not to exceed 11 to 10 p.m. unless specified in the use permit. Limitations for invitation-only functions, 26 times per calendar year, no more than 2 times per week. This is where the outdoor seating note is. It says that this is as part of the conditions of approval. It states that no outdoor seating is permitted unless specifically allowed in the wine tasting use permit, and the applicant is requesting 12 outdoor seats. All areas shall be limited specifically to the activity described in the wine tasting use permit. No expansion or enlargement of the area of use, relocation, or reconfiguration is allowed. The parking requirements have been incorporated into 1948, our general parking and loading requirements. And the requirements is for 1 space for each 300 square feet of gross sales area. For outdoor seating, no off-street parking is required. So here's the list of our 2022 inventory. So that we would add Darling onto that list. Here's some additional photos. And we have the findings of approval. And when it's appropriate, I have a letter. I'll be happy to read the correspondence from the applicant, but whenever you feel that's
Let's go ahead and
appropriate.
ask questions of staff, and then we can go to the letter.
Yeah, my question is, I'm wondering why it is that the application has to come before the commission at all when it is not a change of use. The specific location has been 2 wine tasting rooms previously, and I don't understand why we require an additional use permit review for an activity that's the same. If this was a change from a bicycle shop to a bicycle shop, it wouldn't come before us. In fact, if it was a change from a bicycle shop to a retail store, it wouldn't come before us. Why is this coming before us?
It's all part of the special use standards that were passed.
I can just give a short answer, and then Christine can go into the code if it's of interest. Basically, what happened was, at the point in time of the ordinance, it made all existing wine tasting facilities non-conforming, and such that they continue, should they not continue for 60 days, then they've lost that non-conforming status. So this made a wine tasting use permit specific to anybody that wants to then get one of those non-conformities and make it conforming.
So it's as if the previous use didn't exist anymore.
Correct.
I mean, in other words, the actual use itself is no longer approved, so it is being treated as a new use. Is that something worth looking at in a revision of our codes? I mean, does this actually make any sense?
Well, there's a lot of heightened sensitivity because the number at the time that the council looked at this was way more than 25. I think it
Right.
was like 29. And I would say because of the pandemic, we lost a few. But certainly something up there. As far as, is it up there with the rest of the things that need to be fixed? Probably not. I think we've had more urgent fires to.
Okay. And just one last question. If I understand it correctly, there is currently a parking study that's being undertaken, which I assume is going to also address the issue of outdoor seating and its relationship to parking. And you may correct me if that isn't part of it, but I'm hoping that it is.
I don't believe that is part of the downtown parking management study. We are working on a separate scope of work with W-Trans to look at our zoning code and to look at what our standards are and how those might need to be updated.
Okay, because to me, the only thing that I wonder about in this application is the application of outdoor seating and its relationship to parking. It's clear that something has happened over the last several years to make outdoor seating highly popular, and we're seeing an increased number of applications for increased outdoor seating of a variety of venues, and I think we need to re-examine its relationship. I mean, in a major way, its relationship to parking demand, because my way of thinking, there's no logic that says somebody who's going to sit at a table outdoors is any different than someone who sits at a table indoors insofar as the parking demand is concerned.
Yeah, I think this issue, we're gonna need to look at this for our restaurants and for wine tasting rooms as well. I think that it was kind of an old school theory where, you know, back in the day, most people wanted to sit inside. And I think our culture has evolved and now it's more preferable to be outside and our climate is lovely and.
The other thing too is there's a difference between outdoor seating on public property versus private property. In the case of this application, the landlords, the owners have off-street parking to meet the demand of 1 to 300 that Christina's put up there. But then it raises the question of, is 1 to 300 the right number? And one can argue that's twice what the norm should be. And then the question is, what is an appropriate parking standard for outdoor seating in the public right-of-way? And how do you ascribe a number to that? And what we've seen in our studies in other jurisdictions like the Napas of this world, you know, we're not that far removed from numbers that we've been playing with, but on the 300, that's another issue altogether. When you combine all of the uses around the plaza, not on private property, so in other words, on public property, that's what this study is going to be talking about, we hope. We received it this afternoon, 80 pages, we'll read it and we'll work with the ad hoc committee on that.
And for where we stand this evening, it is codified wine tasting facilities, one space for each 300 square feet of gross sales area. For outdoor seating, no off-street parking shall be required.
I just have a question. If our parking standards are upgraded or changed and we have existing uses that we approve with a certain standard, does that make those uses legal non-conforming and make any sort of change to those uses subjected to the new parking standards?
It would in the sense that the parking is inconsistent with the code. I don't know about the underlying land use. As long as it maintains that use, it will be permitted because these things now run with the land.
Okay. And just since I've already got the dais, I just noted a discrepancy with the staff report, the conditions of approval, and your presentation about the hours of operation. I believe the staff report says 6 p.m., but your presentation illustrative showed 10 p.m. So I just want to make sure that they're getting the hours that they want.
Yeah, we can modify that to give them more flexibility. I think that's just what they requested, but that's a good comment.
Yeah.
It's always, we would hate to make them go back through it just to,
So we're approving 10 p.m., but they just want 6.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I do have one question. That is, in terms of maximum 35 guests indoors, is that driven by the fire code?
I don't believe so. I think I believe it's just based on the existing number of seats that are in the facility. I can ask.
I'm just curious because I've not been inside that specific facility for a long time, and I'm just, that number jumped out, and I'm trying to envision a small kind of boutique wine place having 35 people in it.
It has a bar. It has a pretty long bar, so I could see 10 spaces at the bar plus a few tables. It's really not a huge space.
Well, there were no seats or tables in there today when I went by. When I looked inside, talking to the contractors, they had tarps all over the place and there was nothing. So I'm guessing, Mr. Chair, that it's related to the size per square foot under the building code.
The building code, not the fire code, which the two would have to work, I suppose.
The applicant says it's not based on fire code, it's based on the existing number of seats.
Okay, thank you. All right, then at this point, if there are no more questions from staff, I would like to read the letter that was
Yeah.
brought, please.
Absolutely. So the applicant is Thomas Darling, Darling Family Wines, and his email and CC to his wife Ashley. Dear Planning Commission, apologies for our absence tonight. We are currently traveling for work and could not make the meeting. We wanted to take a moment to introduce ourselves as well as say thank you for your consideration of our tasting room permit. We are Tom and Ashley Darling. We started Darling Wines in 2017 and are here now to take this big leap for our small family business and open a tasting room. We produce our wines at the custom crush facility Magnolia Wine Service on 8th Street East, and we live on Verano Avenue by Arnold Drive with our 9-month-old son, Desmond, who is growing fast and has been keeping us very busy. Darling Wines is currently a small but mighty 3-person team. Our tasting room manager has 10 years of experience managing tasting rooms and estates across Sonoma and Napa valleys. He's very excited to offer Darling hospitality to guests in downtown Sonoma. In addition, since we are such a small team and want to provide the highest quality experience to our guests, our intent is to only operate indoors upon opening in hopes that we can grow to offering our outdoor seating as a goal for the future. Personally, we're proud to call Sonoma home and strive for our business to become a positive impact in addition to the many great family establishments on the square. Thank you again for the consideration, and we look forward to working with you all. Sincerely, Tom and Ashley Darling.
Okay. I guess at this point I'd like to open it up to the public, but I believe it may be a short opening. And I will now bring it back to the commission for discussion and possible action. Yes.
Well, other than the fact that there seems to be a disconnect on parking between indoor and outdoor, which we can't really do anything about on this application, I have zero problems with this, and it's consistent with what was there before, and would support it.
I'm actually pretty amazed and excited that we got down below our limit on wine tasting rooms so fast, and probably it was related to the shelter in place during COVID. But I remember when that came out, we were all very scared about what was going to happen. And to see us with a few extra spots here is pretty amazing. So I just wanted to say good luck, good work by the staff and city council and everybody who put that moratorium in place and set it at 25. And it seems to be working.
Good. Any other comments?
You do recall how hard fought that was?
I remember. It was
Yeah,
really tough.
I was on the council, and I remember people coming in here and really being upset about the
on
idea.
both sides.
Yeah.
On both sides. But yeah, but I support this as well.
Very good.
Yeah, I have no issues with this application. I support it.
I do have one question for the director. There was some earlier discussion today about possibly a condition of approval associated with current signage. Has that been fleshed out, or is that something that's going to be part of it or not?
I spent several hours digging through the historic files. I have not been able to find the parking signage being approved, so we'll definitely continue to look into that. It looks like there was some kind of a parking agreement that was approved at some point in time, but I wasn't able to find it in our records yet.
So for the edification of the fellow commissioners, could you just share your perspective?
Yeah, as you enter the property, you'll see signs that basically say permit parking only, and which to me discourages the public from going onto private property and being able to park to go to this particular use. So I'd recommend a condition of approval that basically requires that signage along First Street, on the west side of First Street, be removed or otherwise signed such that customers of this Suite A are allowed to go there without sensing that there's an obstacle to their entering and parking in parking spaces to enjoy their wine. Not quite sure how to that's the intent, but when you go there, you'll certainly see those signs.
On my recollection, that was the original conditional use permit that approved that project. They actually requested that, and there was some controversy about allowing privatized parking when it was being used to count for the square footage of the overall use of the building.
Yeah, and you have a use permit before you today, specifically for wine tasting, so that's why we've recommended that signage be removed to allow for three spaces. It's 3 spaces based on the 944 divided by 300. If you want to include a parking space for the 240 for the outdoor seating, which you're allowed to do, it's a use permit, it's discretionary, that would take it up to 4. So if you wanted to have some allowance for that 4th spot because of the outdoor, you could say require them to have unfettered access to 4 spaces and allow the staff to figure out how that's accomplished. Or it could alternatively be 3 spaces.
So, with that in regards to that, I would propose that we do require 3 spaces to be unrestricted.
3 or 4.
And then a 4th if the applicant utilizes the outdoor 12 seats or 240 square feet of, if and when they utilize that the 4th seat or the 4th parking place becomes available at that point.
So we don't run into any issues because it says for outdoor seating, no off-street parking shall be required?
I believe there's discretion in the use permit.
And just to follow up on that, I think that there's a real disconnect in the wine bar ordinance due to a change in the ABC rules. When the ordinance was brought into existence, wine bars were stand-up tastings, and now you can get a bottle and go sit at a table. And essentially what's happened is it's changed from a retail use where you go into Raldi's and get a shirt into a quasi-restaurant use where people linger and occupy the space for a longer period of time. And I believe that difference in use is problematic related to parking. We don't require a large parking load for retail use because customers move through that environment, but we do require a larger parking load for restaurants at 1 for every 4 seats plus 25% only, and then restrict outdoor seating to 25% of that load. So, just my thoughts.
I would agree with that, and I'm wondering why the signage change couldn't include signs attendant to 3 or 4 spaces, as we decide, where in front of each space it says, this parking reserved for Darling Winery customers. And so it seems to me a relatively easy way of designating which spaces go with which use and allocating them that way.
So as you, I can pass my phone around here in a minute, but the sign says tow away,
Yes.
permit parking only. Violators will be towed away at car owner's expense, California Vehicle Code number, police department phone number. To pick up your vehicle and pay your fine, call so-and-so phone number. That doesn't sound to me like I can go into Suite A and go to that wine tasting room, the Darling wine tasting room, and enjoy wine without having to worry about where my car's gonna be when I leave. And that was the spirit and intent of where we were going with trying to have that signage removed such that when you go onto the property, you actually do see signs, I'll pull those up too, that show reserved for Sonoma Court shops, reserved, and then Subragia underneath it. So,
No, I get it.
you get it? Okay. So, anyway.
Yeah, that's the way to
So I think they can do that on their property, but stuff at the entryway, I think, is needed to be removed. Now, excuse me, the question, I'm sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. There are 2 parking lots. There's one there with 49 spaces, and then the other one, I believe, with 7 and a handicap. I think the intent would be, perhaps, if the motion states that it would be those 7 that would be open to the 4, or would you want to say they have the ability to go into the 49 space area? I'm not sure.
And just for edification, there will not be any bottle table service. It's only tastings.
I don't know what the distinction is between which parking spaces get designated. Certainly, if they want to continue to have a sign at the entry that says parking reserved for Sonoma Court Shops customers only, violators will be towed, that's okay. That way, at least you know if you're planning to go to the Darling Winery, that you can go in there and find a space marked for Darling Winery and park there. So I don't think I don't think we have to require the elimination of a sign that indicates that if you violate the parking standard here and you are not a customer, your car may be towed. I don't know how they're going to verify customer status very easily, but I don't think they're probably verifying the parking every day easily anyway. But it seems to me that there's a fairly simple fix to this.
Yeah, I think your condition could say, direction is provided, or the current signage that requires permit parking needs to be removed, and alternatively will be replaced with something that you've just stated, and that'll be fine.
I do, as a follow-up to that, though, and maybe I misunderstood, you have suggested in discussion that any private parking space that restricts use by the public is, did you say, counter to the spirit of off-street parking? And I'm curious if that in the future could be a discussion that we have with the parking study and just get some clarity, because if restricting it complicates or exacerbates our parking issue, and there isn't a proven demonstration that by opening it up it becomes detrimental to the landlord, I would be pretty supportive of the idea of private parking being, open for public use. But again, this is just a comment, and I'd welcome any other comments regarding that if one was so inclined.
I haven't even seen in our records that that signage was approved. So that would be kind of my first starting point.
I know those signs are intimidating. It keeps me out of there.
My card get towed, for sure. That's just the luck of the draw, but I think the intent of off-street parking is that this property owner has provided what was then at the time an appropriate number based on square footages at the time and on the life is good, let's say. But they've gone one step further and said this space is reserved for this use. And for fear that if I was one of the other tenants that's in that shopping center and I park in somebody else's reserved spot, would I get towed? Probably. Does it happen? I don't know. I'd be surprised. It would seem to me that the property owner would know which car belongs. But this is a very, very confusing thing when you're, I was telling the chair today, when my dry cleaner has a 15-minute pickup loading zone. I'll park there all day long and go somewhere else in that shopping center because I know it's not enforceable and the city never approved that. The same goes with this. So I kind of like where Commissioner Williams is going with, let's get 4 spaces that have unrestricted access specifically to this use. It's 3, but 4 when they kick into the outside use of the patio area or the forecourt. Because I think the property owner would like to retain those reserved spaces for those other uses, but we just need to clean 4 out where the public can go for that suite.
Yeah, it looks like in 2011, there were signs that are approved, but it says 2-hour customer and tenant parking only.
Well, can we leave the verbiage of the parking signage to staff and go ahead and just approve the wine tasting use permit subject to the conditions of approval, and then add in there staff to formalize parking language for proper signage?
To allow for the unrestricted use of 3 spaces for the use interior, and then a 4th space when the outside courtyard area is used. That could be a motion right there with what I added.
Or would we just want to do it I would suggest maybe for the 35 seats, 3 spaces for 35 seats.
Just keep it as for the 3, I think, the way it was
Okay,
articulated.
so then I'm going to go ahead and make a motion that we adopt the resolution approving the wine tasting use permit subject to the conditions of approval with the addition of staff to put together parking specifics that allow for 3 parking spaces and a 4th if they should add outdoor seating.
As unrestricted spaces for Suite A.
Okay.
Is there a second?
I second.
Further discussion? Seeing none, may I have a roll call, please?
Mix it up. Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner
Yes.
Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
and Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Moving down the agenda, we have item 7.2, which is, as we know, will be continued to a date uncertain. Then slipping down to 7.3.
What?
I'm sorry.
I understand the applicant has requested the item to be continued. My question pertaining to this is a process and I guess a legal question. If I understand correctly, the provision that allows this particular business to operate in the fashion that it does will expire in October because it's operating under a special right granted in coordination with the pandemic response plan that the city put together, which expires in October if it doesn't get renewed. It would appear to me that in and of itself imposes a deadline for the resolution of this matter in that the use will expire in October if this thing is not continued to a date certain that has to happen somewhere before October 31. Am I correct?
Our understanding at the staff level is that there was a use there before the pandemic, and that was, let's say, here. They expanded the use because of the pandemic, and that's what they're asking for right now. So if on October 31st, the pandemic or fresco program ceases to be, they then go back to their pre-pandemic use. But that's not what they're asking for. They're asking for that expansion to where they are today with the pandemic blessings, if you will. So at that point, they'd be able to continue that use under pre-pandemic conditions.
Okay, well, I guess we'll get into it when and if this matter comes back. Thank you.
And I believe the applicant requested a continuance to the May meeting, whenever that meeting would be, but you certainly have discretion to continue it to a time beyond that, or off calendar. But that was a request of the applicant.
Okay, any other comments about 7.2? Then moving on to 7.3 as noted in our agenda.
Mr. Chair, could we have a motion to continue
Oh, I'm
one
sorry.
way or the other? Actually, before you do that, open it up to the public since the item's been introduced.
At this time, I'd like to open up to the public. Any comment on agenda item 7.2? Seeing none, I'm going to close it, bring it back to the commission, and ask for a motion on its continuance.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to continue item 7.2 pertaining to a wine tasting use permit at 380 First Street West.
Second.
Further discussion?
Mr. Chair, if I can, is that to a date specific in the motion, or is that to off calendar?
Let's,
Off calendar at this point.
yeah. Roll call.
This is fun. Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
I get to pop quiz you guys for one.
You get to work on the inside.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
and Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
So in the interest of time on 7.3, because the applicant has withdrawn, we don't have to open it up to the public. We don't have to do anything but move on.
Yes, move on.
7.4, discuss, consider, and take possible action on recommending to the City Council the introduction of an ordinance amending the Sonoma Municipal Code to move the subdivision ordinance. And I'll leave it at that, because I think that tells the story. May we please have a brief staff report?
I love how you specify when you want a brief one or not a brief one. All right, so in 2013 is when the city passed its last comprehensive amendments to the zoning code. The intent was to create one consolidated location for all of the rules and regulations that pertain to development projects. As part of that effort, the subdivision. Oh, is it not? Maybe it just needs a minute. Can you guys see the presentation?
Nope.
Do you want me to wait? I'll be done by the time.
Okay.
The intent was to create the integrated development code with everything put into one place. Since that time, the state's passed numerous housing bills with the intention of streamlining housing and simplifying the development process. Moving the subdivision ordinance from where it is now in Title 19 back to Title 16, where it was previous to 2003, is the first step in a larger reorganization process. I have a couple slides to kind of help highlight. So this is our current integrated development regulations and guidelines. It takes 2 pages and can be at times challenging to find the information that you need. So what this action would do, the proposed ordinance would take Division 6 subdivisions, which is this whole chunk over here. It would remove that, and the intention behind that is that subdivisions are heavily regulated by the Subdivision Map Act, and the city has very little control over that. The Map Act is updated very frequently, and it will help keep the subdivision standards up to date. Here is an example of where we're hoping to head. This is Healdsburg's. It is much more streamlined and simple and has more information that is applicable to most development permits. We only process maybe 2 or 3 subdivisions a year, where most of what we deal with are public counter calls and people who are working on projects that are doing additions or minor developments that don't trigger the MAP Act. So the subdivision currently is 1960 through 1971, and so by removing this, we're going to be taking out close to a quarter of the code and moving it somewhere else, which hopefully will really help streamline the review process. This is what Title 16 looks like right now. And so the proposed ordinance would move the subdivision standards back to Title 16, and there's some minor clerical changes that basically point to the right place. So instead of referring to 19, it'll say 16, and instead of title or division, it says title. And this is really the first step, so we will be needing to go back through the subdivision ordinance and make sure that it is compliant with the Subdivision Map Act. But right now, with this larger reorganization coming, we just want to put it back in the right place, and we'll clean it up later. So if the ordinance is recommended to City Council, the next steps would be to introduce the ordinance potentially on May 4th with potential adoption on May 18th, and the ordinance would go into effect 30 days later. So I'm going to open up for discussion this evening, and we're also open to alternative directions.
Vice Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, unbelievably, I actually read through the whole thing. And I came across 2 sections which I would like to discuss some potential changes. One is certificates of compliance. As the commission members, I'm sure, understand, certificates of compliance under this current language are approved by the city engineer and pertain to essentially legalizing subdivisions which in many cases have been established prior to the current set of laws governing subdivisions in the city of Sonoma. And some of these certificates of compliance have been issued for subdivisions going all the way back to General Vallejo's time in 1853 and later. For example, before the Montini property was acquired by the city. They, in their back pocket, were asserting the potential of some subdivisions going back to Vallejo's time. And one of their negotiating points was that they would hate to have to assert these issues and assert that map because it included parcels just to the north of us, all along the hillside, stretching from First Street west where we are, all the way to the water tanks, were subdivisions for housing, potential for housing. It was one of the negotiating items on the sheet. My concern about the certificates of compliance is I didn't see anything in the language which required a reporting of the issuance of the certificate of compliance. And I think that needs to be included. There needs to be a public notice of the issuance of a certificate of compliance. It can't just be an item that crosses the desk of the engineer and nobody knows about it. And I think it has to have the same kind of public noticing and appeal, because it is appealable. It is appealable, I believe, to the Planning Commission in the first step. But the fact that it's appealable is great. It should also, however, be noticed so people know that they can appeal. So that's one suggestion I've got. The second one has to do with the area of dedications and exactions. In reading through that material, I think I was struck by what I would refer to as an outdated concept and outdated language. It essentially requires, for example, in the case of a dedication, a park on subdivisions of 50 units or greater. At the time that I think this provision was written, it probably made sense. This was prior to some of the larger subdivisions that have since happened in town on the southern end of town and the southern western edge, where across from that large Ledson winery, a large subdivision went into what was essentially open space. I think the problem is, and the reason I say the language is outdated, is because we don't have many projects coming up in the city of Sonoma that are going to be for 50 lot subdivisions. And what that means is we're not going to get any park dedications. But we are going to have a fill-in situation where in the aggregate, the cumulative impact of a variety of projects, some of which may be relatively close to each other, would indicate the need for more dedication of land. An example I would give you is what's happened on Mockingbird Lane, and now what's going to happen on the other side of the street on Hummingbird Street, or whatever it's going to be called. Between those two, you don't quite up add to 50, but you come up to 40 units. And yet there's no park, there's no dedication. They're paying Quimby fees. That's great. There was a long time in the city's history where we neglected to even charge Quimby fees, and I'll credit our planning director with catching on to that fact. That was a good catch. But how do I say this? The problem with the Quimby fees, as useful as that money is, it gets spread out. It doesn't result in the creation of new parks. And I think some of the neighborhoods need new parks. For example, over in that Mockingbird Lane and the Hummingbird Lane area, which is going to be a much more highly dense situation than we have presently, my feeling is that there should be some provision for a park. Now, ironically enough, there is a parcel of land at MacArthur and 5th Street West, which was dedicated to the city for the uses of a quote-unquote park, which remains completely unmaintained, undeveloped, other than some mowing. It's got a swale running through it. I think it was given to the cities by the Sebastianis, and technically I don't know what category that is in. I know that at least one council member has expressed an interest in seeing that actually developed formally as a park, specifically for, in light of the mobile home park residents across the street, and now in consideration of these housing developments that have gone around there. So I'm just getting the feeling that we need to examine this language so that the cumulative effect of multiple projects somehow aggregate to more than just a Quimby fee, and that we actually get back into the business of imposing the dedication of parks for some of these areas. I don't think we've created a new park since probably it's probably been at least 10 or 15 years, and the same goes for dedications of land for bicycle paths and pedestrian paths. And I'm talking about class 1 type opportunities where you could really perhaps have a chance to segregate the pedestrian bicycle paths off the street. I just think it's worth a look, and to bring this up to the 21st century and the reality of Sonoma, which is we're not going to be doing a lot of 50 unit subdivisions anymore. And we need to, but we do have the need for more parks.
Yeah, just very quickly, the subdivision ordinance is a very static document, and as Christina was saying, it changes almost yearly, especially with respect to lot line adjustments. And 66412D has been one of my pet peeves, and the legislature always goes after it. You know, the whole concept of 4x4ing and the like. So yeah, there's many places that it needs to be updated, and our goal at this point was, let's get it out of the tome, make it easier for people to take a tome home and try to figure and navigate their way through it when they want to develop. So that was simply what we were trying to do tonight.
Well, I understand, and I approve of what's being suggested. And I'm not saying that we should hold this up for the purposes of changing the language on the dedications portion. But I would like that to be added to the list of things to be talked about, because if we don't do something, we're not going to get any new parks.
No, absolutely, and we're working on getting scopes of work. We have a couple scopes of work to get some help with the subdivision ordinance. It's definitely over, out of my area of expertise. Regarding the existing language, that the dedications and exactions for parkland is governed by the Quimby Act, and so that's where that 50 parcels comes from. So we would need to talk with the city attorney whether if we veer from that, how we do that in a different way. But great point. And we do have a dedicated fund, so the money, the Quimby Act fees, we confirmed that with finance for sure.
I just want to piggyback on the comment about certificates of compliance, because if these are done in a dark room, and nobody ever knows about them, nobody can ever have a chance to appeal them because the time will have run. So we really need to clean that up, and I think we probably all are aware of a somewhat controversial certificate of compliance that
Some
should have
jurisdictions
had the
that I've
light of
worked.
day.
Yeah, sorry. Clearly, that's one in a small town. That's very important, because they can actually be approved without consultation with the planning department. That's happened in some jurisdictions that I've worked. With respect to tentative parcel maps, there are some jurisdictions that require them to go to the planning commission. Some just go straight to the council. So I mean, there's ways to deal with things like that. In this community, though, I think planning commission needs to get the tentative parcel maps, the ones in the 2-lot subdivisions. So that's probably not a place to correct, but certainly something to look at.
Oh, I do have a suggestion relating to park in lieu fees, and I know that we've been enforcing the requirements now. I think, can't remember what subdivision I brought it up. Maybe it was even Mockingbird Lane. I said, "Are we collecting these?" And I said, "Oh, well, we will for this subdivision." So that's a good thing that we're collecting those fees. My suggestion is, as another item to be discussed, is looking at long-range planning, and as a part of our general plan, is to look at a comprehensive housing element that may have a park aspect to it. Dedications and identifying areas where there is a need for open space, as opposed to designating specific sites, but saying areas that have a specific need for open space, whether it be a playground, whether it be a child's playground or a ballpark or even just general open space. There's like three major categories. So I would suggest that maybe we look at that when we're looking at all the other updates, and I'd be more than happy to help planning staff look at that, given that I was the park planner for the city of San Francisco.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been seeing, Christina, too, in the planning world is people want to get away from the half-acre tot lots and do something that's more manageable. You know, a couple of acres, if you will, and that's where the Quimby thing comes in. At what point do you strike that balance? Does it make sense to have this applicant, and I'm just talking generically speaking, the Hummingbird project, give us cash because they can't physically put it on there or we don't want it there, and put that same money dedicated, or require them to do the half acre or so on the northeast corner of MacArthur and Fifth? There's so many different ways to do it, and I think each project is on a case by case. When it comes to the ability to parks, your commission may recall that the council gave direction recently, and the code changes have not appeared yet before them, to create a parks, recreation, and open space committee. And this is certainly some of the things that they could be doing. And they also said create a climate action committee as well, as opposed to having the CSEC devote its time not to parks, recs, and open space, which is one of their responsibilities, but just focusing on environmental things. So that those responsibilities are going to be divided, and maybe that's one of the things that they can do. And it's not just the maintenance of the ones that we have, it's also park master planning. Again, we don't have a staff, we don't have a parks department, we have other facility or other bodies that take care of the maintenance. So it's certainly something to think about.
Very good.
One last comment. I think the potential for development in the southern quadrant of the city, you know, the Gateway area and the parcels beyond it as they go south on Broadway, are clearly at some point in the future going to, at least some of those properties, going to be annexed into the city. We've discussed that in regard to the county's allocation of housing to some of these parcels. This, to me, is an area of the city that desperately needs a park if we're going to put a considerable number of housing units out there. When the hotel was originally approved, there was no wall that divided it off from the street. The space between the stone building that's on that parcel and the building on the corner that was designated as a commercial building was approved to be open space and essentially serve as a park serving public area. And that has been now closed off and privatized. So the portion of that area which was originally planned for public access in a park-like open space has been eliminated. I hope that in the future, as the city looks to the planning of that area, that a park in that zone would be part of the plan.
I wanted just to piggyback and follow up a couple of comments. I think that the idea of additional parks throughout the community is good and is solid. I also think the idea of improving our pathway trailways. I am concerned about what I call the maintenance of these facilities, because I would much rather have well-maintained scattered than we have this proliferation that we don't allocate the funds to maintain them to what I call not a pristine Disneyland level, but just an acceptable level. And that's where maybe with the Rex Commission or whatever may be coming out, there can be discussion about the opportunities, the comprehensive plan, looking at the big, but also recognizing that I could get excited about continuing to create our network of pathways, because I see people really using those quite a bit versus, I'll be crude, a ugly plastic looking play structure that satisfies the need to not get sued because some little child fell and cut his lip and now we have to go with landing space and so on and so forth. But that's just my comment about, I love additional open space, but I just also think we make sure we have funding to maintain it. So with that in mind and those comments, is there any more? So no more questions of staff. Now let me open it up to the public. Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion and possible motion.
I would just like to echo the comments of Vice Chair Barnett and Commissioner Barbos about the need for more transparency related to the certificates of compliance and tentative map filing. I think that's something that we failed at, and I'd say has really nothing to do with what you're asking for here. But I do want to just echo those comments that I think as we get down the path, we would really like to see that be way more public. Thanks.
Mr. Chair, if I can be so bold to say, you could forward your recommendation to adopt the ordinance to the, recommend the council adopt the ordinance with a request that at some point in the future, that way this motion will get tagged, that intent, if that's the consensus, will travel with the recommendation. We can forward that to the council.
Be a good idea.
I'll make a motion, if it's in order, that we recommend to the city council the introduction of the ordinance amending the Sonoma Municipal Code and to move the subdivision ordinance, etc., that we further request that the language pertaining to certificates of deposit and subdivision maps be more publicly noticed, and that the appeal period be clearly designated upon that notification to the public. And we would also suggest that the language pertaining to open space parks be reviewed in light of the Quimby Act with an idea to creating more of a parks master plan going forward for the city.
Is there a second?
I'll second with just the one change. It's not certificates of deposit. We're not a lending institution. Certificates of compliance. I second that.
Further discussion? Very good then. Roll call, please.
Commissioner McDonald,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
and Chair Wellender.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Very good. Thank you. Moving on to items for discussion. 8.1, we have discussion, consideration, and possible action regarding a change in the day of the Planning Commission's regular meeting. And I will not be asking staff for background because I've got the background today, just so everyone knows that there is rationale behind the request. In talking to our legal counsel, the challenge that this firm had was they had a hotshot young attorney that was assigned to the community of Weed, California. And this hotshot decided to pursue another law firm shortly thereafter. And so this firm had a contract with Weed to provide this counsel support, legal counsel support. And there was a conflict in limited number of attorneys and possible days available. And because I was not at face value thought that we were not respected as far as the fact that we had an established schedule. But apparently this is something that the firm has asked us to consider. I have been having some discussion with others that Thursday still seems to be, in my mind, the preferred day of the week, and it would fit that we could consider the third Thursday of the month as our regular meeting date, and then should we need a special meeting in a given month, we could then consider the first. I also want to say that it's my understanding that this may be a short-term need, because I think it's the desire of the law firm to assign a new individual that they're wanting to bring up to the community up north. So David Ruderman would then be less encumbered. And again, part of my reasoning for flushing this out is that we were told that Mr. D5, Mr. Ruderman, was, there was a desire to groom him for being ultimately our new legal counsel when Jeff retires. So I just wanted to give a little bit of background and simply say that I was pleased that there was apparently some rationale behind this request. And so that's what we're here to discuss this evening. And I'm open for comments and thoughts.
How quickly would we intend to implement this change?
May 19th. That'll be your next regular meeting.
Really, that quickly? Okay.
However, we'll have a discussion a little bit later on, I think, about the special meeting on the 28th of this month anyway. So we'd just be putting it back from the May 12th meeting to the 19th.
And this will have no bearing on the decision this evening when we start, but I will be out of town on the 12th. But I would leave it in good hands of the vice chair should we decide to keep our second Thursday through the month of May.
Well, I have no objection to the change. Thursdays are really the best day of the week for me. So if the rest of the commission is comfortable with it, I'm comfortable with it.
I have a conflict on May 19th, but I can try and work through that.
I also have the same, or not the same conflict, but a conflict on the 19th. And would very much like to attend the discussion, the second discussion of the, special item.
Mr. Chair, we could start in June. I mean, that's really not the issue here. There's not every night that we'll need legal counsel here anyway, as tonight might be a good example.
Mr. McDonald, any thoughts?
Oh, I was just looking through the whole couple of years, making sure that there wouldn't be any weird things happening. I don't have a.
Sorry. I was just looking through the calendars for the next 2 years, and I don't see any reason why we can't do that. So,
Good.
You're a busy guy.
Well, let's go ahead then. If the thought process was to, as of June 2022, to change our formal monthly meeting to the third Thursday,
That'd be June 16th then.
would someone like to make a motion on that?
I'll make the motion that we move our regular meeting to beginning on June 16th to the third Thursday of the month.
I'll second that.
Could I ask an added amendment, and then should there be a need for a second meeting in a given month, that we have it on the first Thursday? Okay, you okay with that? Second.
Agreed.
Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Commissioner O'Neill,
Yes.
Commissioner Barbos,
Yes.
Commissioner Willers,
Yes.
Commissioner McDonald,
yes.
Vice Chair Barnett,
Aye.
Chair Wallinger.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Issues update.
Question on the schedule. Do we meet in July or August? Or do
No,
we
we'll
get
be
a
going
month?
dark in July.
Okay, perfect.
And that'll be not just the commission, that'll be all of the bodies.
Yay.
I just have a few things, Mr. Chair, if I can. So number one would be just to bring to your attention, if you haven't heard of it already, that the Amazon last mile facility application has been withdrawn from the county. Next Wednesday, all going well, there will be the opening of the Spark, the first dispensary in our city, over there on Highway 12. The W-Trans parking study, I just want to mention that very briefly. When I first arrived at the city, it was a part of the Public Works Department to have a study done of the downtown parking relative to Casa Grande, the use of the parking lot, it's called Lot B on Napa Street, East Napa Street, to talk about the issues of parking demand and pricing, if that was the case. That study was generated in 2017 and 18 that was relying on 2014 data. Christina's worked with W-Trans over the last few months, several months, to in tandem with the parklet discussion, talk about having that study updated, if you will. We contracted with W-Trans, and that study back in the day said, hey, guess what, City of Sonoma, there's a parking problem and demand, as far as demand and supply. Our intent was not to say, can you go study to see if we've got a parking problem? It was, let's assume that we've got a parking problem. Please come up with some traffic demand management techniques, if you will. And so we hope that this report that we received this afternoon, it's 80 pages or so, we'll take a read of it over the next week, and we'll possibly talk about that at our next City Council zoning ad hoc meeting with Council members Felder and Vice Mayor Barnett. So good news on that point. It's Christine was able to get it past go, and here we are. We're moving along with it, so that'll become a public document. This is an admin draft at this point. We'll look for obvious mistakes and freshening it up so it's ready for public consumption. In the Planning Magazine this month, I want to point your attention to an article. Is tourism still a viable economic development strategy? And the answer is yes. So if you have a few minutes, it takes about 10 minutes, you might want to take a quick read if you haven't already seen that. We also have an article or an email that we'll send to you from the Institute of Local Government that's talking about a new handbook that they've released. So you'll just simply tag on a hyperlink and you'll be able to see a handbook for planning commissioners and staff talking about the changing world of planning over the last few years. And ILG has also announced training sessions throughout the state of California. This is a statewide body out of Sacramento. This its board of directors are made up of public sector employees, misspoke, public sector elected officials, and a few professional staff. And the Institute will be having a session in Sonoma, Napa, Solano County, and Marin, I believe, July the 29th, location and time to be determined. So if that's of interest to you, in tandem with this link that we'll send out to you, we'll do that in the next few days, probably next week is my guess. The last thing I wanted to talk about was in updates, that would be our special meeting on the 28th. I don't know, Mr. Chair, if you want to mention or talk about that with respect to direction that we received from the City Council and a strategy to talk about how we do that, not only on the 28th, but also at a successive meeting after that. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've had some discussion across the commission about the 28th, and as you are well aware of, the City Council has opted to send back to us further debate and discussion about what we forwarded on in terms of our recommendations. And I believe partly because of our scheduling, partly because of the importance of the topic, it's going to be a two-step dance. And as I intimated, the first step is on the 28th, of which the majority can come, several will be absent. But I want to reiterate that there will be opportunities for anybody that is not going to be there on the 28th or whatever the subsequent meeting is going to be, to communicate either to me or participate by a conference call or what have you. But the intent is to make sure we capture everybody's perspective and thought process on this topic, and that it's just the logistics of trying to respond to the request of city councils and do it in a timely fashion. So that's really the short and the long of that. And if anybody has any questions, be happy to do what I can, or I will deflect it to those two sitting over there that get paid. On issues follow-up, I do have a question, and this may be just historic. 1201 Broadway, is it dead? Isn't it 1201 your favorite?
The 1211?
I'm sorry,
1211.
1211.
They're still working through their final map process.
Okay,
What project is
that's that housing 4-unit.
The super cool modern one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
where they were having a common driveway with their neighbor?
Yeah, no, it's active.
It's active.
They're
Okay.
just
I had not heard rumbling, so I was just curious.
Christine, has that been 2 years since that was approved? Because they got a 2-year life on it, right?
yeah. So it expired. It had a 1-year or 2-year, but there was a automatic map act, not map act, but because of COVID, the state
Okay.
passed.
Oh, on the residential permits,
Yeah.
yeah, okay.
Okay, geez. Get back to my agenda here, make sure I don't forget anything. So with that, we have comments from the commission.
I have one comment, it has to do with a series of emails that I will not respond to. It has to come from a known before. I don't click onto anything using the city's laptop. Is this a legitimate assigned training course, or is this just spam?
That's spam.
Spam, okay, okay. Can I ask why we're getting spam?
It's not spam. It was a phishing campaign to try to get people to see who would click on it. And then if you click
was
on
it
it, then
the city's own phishing?
yeah, so if you click the phishing button, it'll send you an email that says, "Congratulations, you."
You're totally messing up. Okay, thank you. Well, I haven't clicked on anything.
That's why I don't use the computer. Any other comments? I believe it's everybody's recognition. Mr. McDonald, you are permanent, and thank you for accepting the position.
Well, I guess I did through a series of phone calls, yes. I guess I shouldn't be here, but I persuaded the powers that be to stay around for a
Very
little while.
glad that you were successful. And then I do know that we've been noticed for finding the alternate. There is a solicitation out, so I would love to see us fill that in some capacity, because I think that's important.
Have we received applications for that?
Just opened up just recently.
Oh, okay.
This week.
And in an effort not to set a record, but to bring closure to this gathering, would anybody like to make a
I
motion?
make a
to
motion
adjourn?
that we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Why don't you take just a unanimous call out?
So noted.
Yes,
Okay, Siri, shut up.
thank you.
Good night, everyone. Good night.